Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faerie Conclave. This is episode 107. I'm your host, Alec. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm super excited to be joined by an extra special guest. It's Kurohitsuki. How are you doing today, Kuro?
I'm doing great today. Thank you so very much for having me on.
Yeah, no, I've been super excited for this because you've been on my list to have on the show for a really long time, and I finally met you in person at MagicCon Chicago, and It was just so much fun. I feel like you have such a positive and optimistic presence, and immediately I was like, okay, I definitely need to hang out with this person more. So I'm glad we could make this work.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm very glad that we finally got to get this together.
Yeah, and to introduce you a little bit, at least from where I know you from, I have watched your Twitch streams where you do a lot of Commander content plus some other stuff. But yeah, introduce yourself a little bit more. Tell us what you do and yeah, what are you about?
Yeah, okay, so I'm Kurohitsuki. You can find me at twitch.tv/Kurohitsuki, as well as on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of those places. But yeah, I focus mainly on the casual Commander format. So my goal is just to really see what people like about their decks and like watching their decks start to do that thing. I appreciate like a synergistic deck construction. So if you have a goal to do a thing or like a very specific theme, I hope that your deck is doing it, because I am here to be enamored with what you got built. So that's what I love to do, being able to play with like 3 people at a time and just watch like 3 different decks all try to go off, including my own. It's just like, oh, this is so fun.
Yeah, and I can tell from watching that you always have guests on that feel like this similar way. That's like how they want to play. And
yeah,
it just makes it so entertaining to watch because everyone's like excited about seeing what the other players are doing. And I think that, yeah, it adds a lot. So it makes it really fun to watch.
Good. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. And I'm excited to have you on today to interview you about one of your decks.
Yes.
And for 2 reasons. One, I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've talked about a Lord of the Rings themed deck on the show.
Which is wild.
I know. It's one of my favorite sets of all time. I've definitely like mentioned cards from it and talked about it, but nobody's like brought a deck to talk about. So I'm excited to talk about some Lord of the Rings. And also it's a Rule 0 deck, which is always fun. So Yes.
I'm not typically one that does Rule 0 decks. This is my first ever and only Rule 0 deck. Because I tend to like whatever restrictions, WotC puts on the card, right? Like whether like not having partner but still making it work somehow, or like the ban list and everything. I like knowing what the rules are and then just having like unlimited play space within that. But for this one specifically, it's 2 characters very near and dear to my heart, both through Magic and just me personally, and they are quite literally like OTP. So I figure this is a pretty interesting duo here to run together. And it's just been a lot of fun, honestly, just so much fun making this come to life.
I love that. Yeah, I think Rule 0 decks are tricky oftentimes because without the restrictions of the rules of Commander and like the card designs and stuff, it's like it's easy to go overboard. And so I'm interested in talking about how you've kind of like kept an eye on that. Yeah, and we're already kind of like getting into it, which I'm super excited for. Really quick, before we start with my first question to kind of introduce the commanders of the deck, I am going to shout out one of my patrons at the Conclave Mentor patron level. So HB, thank you so much for being a patron. I really appreciate it. Let's get into it. So yeah, and we were talking about how this is Rule 0 Commander. Please tell me who the commander or commanders are and kind of what inspired you to put this deck together in the first place.
Okay, and also like we can warp this back to the front. Pronouns he, him.
Perfect.
Take that voice clip and move it forward. All right, so this is my very first Bant deck, because I'm actually not a very big green player. So, and then green blue is also just like not a color combination I particularly care too much for. And I've never had a Bant deck before. I have 50 commander decks, and I have not yet had this color combination till this one. But this is Aragorn, Company Leader, who is green-white, and Arwen Undomiel, which is green-blue. So Aragorn, Company Leader, it's a 3-mana 3/3 human ranger. Whenever the ring tempts me, if I choose a creature other than Aragorn, Company Leader as the ring bearer, put your choice of a counter from among First Strike, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink on Aragorn. He also has, whenever you put one or more counters on Aragorn, put one of each of those kinds of counters on up to one other target creature. So his sort of deck is all about finding just like the cards in the Lord of the Rings set that, ring tempt, of course, and then putting the ring on anyone but Aragorn. So then you can start passing around these abilities. Typically, you'll put the Death Touch, Lifelink, whatever counters on Aragorn, and then he can place that on another creature. And then we have Arwen Undomiel, blue-green 2/2 Elf Noble, that says whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And she also has pay 4 scry 2, but that never gets activated.
Yeah.
Or sorry, pay 6 scry 2. So.
Ooh, yeah.
But the whole point is just okay, you scry, which is pretty straightforward and easy to do. A lot of the elf, that's the elf mechanic in the set. But you scry and you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Typically, she will put that +1/+1 counter on Aragorn, who will then say, "Oh, babe, thank you so very much. How about you also get a +1/+1 counter?" And that is pretty much the whole vibe of this deck. Even though these two characters are, they don't have partner with, for obvious reasons. They're in the main set, so you don't have commander specific mechanics in the main set. That's just how that works. But they're still in some way, shape, or form relational to each other, right? One creature gives counters and this other creature says, "Oh, I got counters, let me share this amongst everyone else." This is also just in terms of the multiple Arwen and multiple Aragorn cards. This is them at similar parts in the Lord of the Rings kind of story, because the way the Lord of the Rings cards works is they have there's multiple Aragorns, multiple Arwens, but they're at different places in their lives and their journeys, and these two kind of match up at a similar time here. So this was it was a match made in heaven, and I saw it and I said, this is what I'm going to do. I gotta rock this.
Nice. Yeah, I really like this because, like you said, there are lots of different versions of Aragorn and Arwen in this set, but for me, at least for this version of Aragorn, it's it's kind of my favorite design for an Aragorn card. I've played against, in our play group that I have locally, there's a player who played the Naya Aragorn quite a bit.
Yeah,
I think it's the Naya one, right? That has
Hornburg Hero with
Renown. Yeah, we've got Hornburg Hero. I played against the one that has the Monarch and makes it really hard to block. Yep. I played against both of those quite a bit. And I like those cards and they're really cool. And but I think mechanics to flavor wise, this one just hits the spot for me. The part in the movie where he refuses to take the ring from Frodo just makes me so happy every time I watch it. And that's exactly what this is, right? It's he's being tempted by the ring, but if he refuses, then he kind of, levels up.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also levels up those around him, which is just it's so good. So yeah, and I really like that, but I think there isn't an Aragorn and Arwen card where they're together on a card, but it's correct. It's green
Aragorn
white.
And Arwen wed.
Yeah,
yep, and that's of course in this deck.
Yep, that's what I figured. So yeah, I really like that, and I think for these decks, I have a couple decks also based around Lord of the Rings cards, and one of the things is getting the colors that you want is sometimes tricky for the flavor. So I think having this Aragorn, which has such cool mechanics, but then adding blue to it, so you can have all of these elves and these other Lord of the Rings cards that add flavor to it. I just like that a lot. I think that's a really cool way to do this, and compared to the other Aragorn cards, I don't at least looking at the commanders right now, I don't think this is going to be stronger than some of some of the Aragorn decks I played against.
No,
So
not by itself. The other Aragorn cards, like Aragorn, King of Gondor, really fits that role because he's like, I'm gonna lead the charge. Like I am your king. I'm going to lead the charge. We're going to attack unblockably, right? So like you're waiting for him to like be the pinnacle of the tip of the spear, as it were, which makes sense at that point of his life. The 4-color Aragorn, he's very much there like, okay, I'm gonna be here, keep on casting spells, I'll keep on giving these other buffs, and then eventually, like, you know, we're gonna swing in because we have a big army and a bunch of damage dealt. And then Aragorn and Arwen Wed, that's far more just like buffing your whole board because you get a life and plus encounters on all of your creatures, so they're more just in the background. Hornburg Hero is also like, I'm here to give all of my creatures first strike and renown, so the more they deal damage, the better they get, and eventually we're going to get in there and swing. You know, Aragorn remains the linchpin of all of these decks, and that's great. Like, that's how it should be. This one, he's still very much the linchpin, but he's doing it by literally tossing counters and abilities to other creatures that normally don't have them, and after they share it with him, and that's just like what's awesome about this deck.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, it just adds a lot to the rule 0. It makes me a lot more interested in playing against it when it has this much flavor attached to it. And it just like, it doesn't look like when I see the King of Gondor Aragorn across the table, I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to die very fast if I don't find a way to like.
It's a Monarch deck, right? You know what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. But this one, I'm like, you know, it's more, I can just tell it's more about the flavor, and that just makes me more interested in seeing what's going on here. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so let's go to my next question for you, which is, what kind of history has this deck gone through? Like, have you made, since you first built it, have you made any notable changes to it?
Yeah, so when I first got into it, so one of the reasons why I'm also like especially proud about this deck is that like it's not because it's rule 0, it's not an EDH rec deck. Like I love EDH rec, I have it open all the time, but like I've had to look at maybe like 4 different kinds of commanders to see, okay, what can I put from among all of those cards in here to make this work? Because my goal, like Aragorn does ability counters already, right? And it's just like, okay, and Arwen gives +1/+1. It's like, all right, cool. Bants +1/+1 and ability counters. Well, that's the same colors as the Capenna family, the brokers. Oh my gosh, yes, the brokers. So it's just like, wait a minute, ability counters. That also fits with let's see, it was mainly Falco Spara and Perry the Pulverizer.
Oh, nice.
Those 2 decks of just like ability counters, because that's when they started doing kind of like more ability counters. And like Perry the Pulverizer, he does a shield counter and then says whenever he attacks, target creature you control gets +X and trample equal to the number of like the different kinds of counters you have on permanents, right? Like that was about having different types of permanents, not just 50 +1/+1s, but having a +1/+1, a flying, a lifelink, a trample, etc. And then like Falco Spara, take a counter away to like cast more spells from the top of your deck and everything like that. And then on top of that, I also had to factor in a bunch of scry as well, because I want to scry rather consistently so I can keep on putting counters on Aragorn so then he can keep on tossing them around. And there's a lot of scry cards in Lord of the Rings, and that helps. But also, there's a lot of cards that just like passively scry whenever you do a thing. So one of the best cards in the deck, for sure, like by far, is Season of Growth. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you scry one. That's great. Like that just says like, okay, my Arwen commander is just doing her thing, like just 100% of the time now, as I simply just play more cards. Great. So she's always doing her thing. I'm casting creatures. I scry. Awesome. That's a counter for Aragorn. That's a counter for Arwen. In order to find different like ring tempt you mechanics in blue, green, white, which is not the strongest colors for ring tempting, let me tell you. I have things like Bombadil's Song. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gain hexproof until end of turn, which is great, right? Like you need some protection for your cards, but then also the ring tempts you. So not only did I save my Aragorn from death and destruction or whatever, but I've also had the ring tempt me. Arwen typically is who I will just simply give the ring to, because why not? They're married. And then she'll get those benefits as well as, okay, Aragorn wasn't targeted. Cool. I'll get a counter there, and now Arwen will also get a counter. It was just like the fact that I've had to go and look around to see, like, okay, what are other Bant colored decks already doing for having, like, counter typal, and then how can I incorporate that also with, like, the scry mechanic and the ring tempt you mechanic. It's a lot. Like, it took a while to kind of really find a good place for this, but I honestly feel very, very strongly for it. I really, really like what I've been able to do here. Even though the deck does not win, like, as often, I'd say, just because, like, it does take a lot of setup, and the payoff is still just like, oh, I sure hope I can attack a couple times. It's still very, very fun the entire way through. While I'm doing it, I'm having a blast.
Yeah, I like that too. That's exactly what I want a deck to do, is like, when it does its thing, I think that is often rewarding, but the, like, jumping through the hoops leading up to doing the thing, it should also be fun. So yeah, I like that a lot. And I think one thing that I think is really cool about this deck is, like, you might be the only person with this deck, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
in the world.
I think it's that might be true, truly. Like,
yeah, which is always so cool to me. I'm definitely, I also love EDH Rec and always have at least one tab of it open at all times. But usually, even if there's kind of an obscure commander that I'm interested in, and I'll be able to find similar commanders that do something on EDH Rec that have more data that I can look through, and I'll do that all the time. So it's cool to see. Here's kind of like a combination of a few different ideas that have been done before, but only kind of recently, and you're putting them together in a way that there's no history for it. You've kind of had to figure it out yourself, which I think that adds a lot to it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just being like, going through that extra, just like those extra steps to really find and put things together to make the deck, like, just fully your own. It's just a really fun experience, and one that I don't care if people do it, but it is definitely, like, it's been a wonderful time. It's been a wonderful time.
Yeah, and I also just really like ability counters. I don't know if I've talked about this, but yeah, I wanted to shout out that I think they're just so much fun, and they're, like, very intuitive, and it makes sense. And something I think is really cool is taking creatures that don't normally have, these abilities, and there are ways to give them, like, the ability counters, to give them cool abilities that aren't, like, using equipment or auras, which historically would have been the only ways to do that. So yeah, I think that's really cool. I have a Skullbriar deck that since the introduction of ability counters has just been like, how many keywords can we put on this horrifying creature?
Yeah, and the fact, because, like, most ability counter things, that's mainly from Ikoria, and those are typically from, like, the Bonders, and they say, like, most of them say, like, non-human. So that hurts with Aragorn. There's been a lot of really cool, interesting cards, and also just kind of different patterns of play. So, like, Denry Klin, Editor-in-Chief, he's been really cool because, like, he enters with your choice of either a +1/+1 counter, first strike, or vigilance counter on it, right? And then whenever another non-token creature you control enters the battlefield, you get a counter that Denry Klin has. So being able to, like, have him out, say, like, get a vigilance counter, whatever. And then I start putting counters on him with Aragorn. As Aragorn gets his own, then now other creatures I control also enter with all of those ability counters that Denry has.
That's really cool.
I'd say probably, honestly, the weakest part of the deck is making sure I get ring tempt triggers. It's like they're super not repeatable. It's difficult. You need a card that says ring tempt you, and that's it, sort of thing. But like Frodo Baggins is definitely like the best one. Just whenever Frodo or another legendary creature enters the battlefield, the ring tempts me. So like that's great, right? Like that happens a lot in this deck because there's just a lot of legendary creatures. The scry aspect. Oh, the best scry and ring tempt card is Elrond, Lord of Rivendell. Because he says whenever him or another creature enter the battlefield, I scry one, and if it's the second time this ability has resolved, the ring tempts me. So it's just super awesome and just really interesting. Again, like with the flavor of this deck, Elrond, Arwen's dad, who like was unapproving of the relationship for a long time, but like still let it foster. He's okay. Creatures come into play. Scry. Okay, cool. Now, if two creatures come into play, just whoever those two creatures might be, Lord only knows. Well, I'll scry again. So, like, you're triggering Arwen's ability with the scry, and then if there's two creatures, well, now the ring tempts you, which will trigger Aragorn's ability, and it's just one of those things where it's like clearly they wanted these two cards to be used together in some way, shape, or form, because even the dad is like, giving the blessing, by the way, of saying like, oh, you two are together? All right, well, fine, scry, and like the ring will tempt and blah, blah, blah. It's just so good. It's just so cool. It's just really, really cool.
That is really cool. Yeah, I've never noticed that interaction between those three cards before, but it definitely seems like Elrond is like officiating those two.
And just like the last one, even on top of that, Gilrain, Dunedain Protector. This is Aragorn's mom, and I just put her in every single Aragorn deck that I have, which, mind you, was like all of them. Nice. But she's fantastic. She has like her ability is like pay 2, tap, exile another target creature you control. You may return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you don't, then at the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a vigilance and lifelink counter on it. So her whole thing, it was like, you could either flicker the card immediately, or if you want to take it to like the next end step, the creature will come back with a vigilance and lifelink counter on it, which, hey, those are more ability counters that Aragorn can then share around. And that's just like another aspect of like the parents here, These cards are meant to be. This was meant to be a partner deck, just like it clearly it was. Totally. I just love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, no, that's really cool too. And I'm also noticing there are a lot of creatures that have ETB effects and have like when a legendary creature enters, do this. So yeah, yes. So I could see her just being really good in this deck just for that, but also it works with the counters. And one card I wanted to shout out while we're talking about the ability counters is a card I've been putting in a lot of decks is Scavenged Brawler. I see is in your list.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Oh my goodness. He's difficult. Like I border on taking him out all the time, but like all those counters are just so good.
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot of work. And here, I guess it's not I don't see this card very often, but it's a 6 mana artifact creature construct, a 4/4 with flying, vigilance, trample, and lifelink. And that's all it does when it's on the battlefield. But it has pay 5, exile it from your graveyard, choose target creature, put 4 +1/+1 counters, a flying counter, a vigilance counter, a trample counter, and a lifelink counter on that creature as a sorcery.
Yep.
Which, that's a lot of counters for something that wouldn't
but
normally
all that
have
on Aragorn. I would say deck-wise, the biggest downfall is that Aragorn doesn't naturally get a trample counter. And trample would change everything. Like first strike, death touch, vigilance, lifelink, those are all great, especially like first strike, death touch. That's typically where I go first. But not being able to like just always get in there with trample, it has been the most difficult aspect of the deck because it's definitely based on combat for sure. So I've been trying to find different ways to get around that particular issue. There's not a lot of cards that give trample counters, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see how, especially with this giving 4 +1/+1 counters along with the trample counter, that would be really good. Yeah, it sucks that the scry isn't like actually surveil in this case, so you could just like put it straight into the graveyard.
Right.
Yeah, so I bet getting it into there is probably the hardest part of this card. I could see when it pays off, it's like pretty
boy does it.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this throughout, but what is it about this deck that keeps you coming back to it, that keeps it around and makes you want to play it?
Really, it's just the pride of just like having something that I had to grab multiple threads for in order to put it together. And I'm very proud of how it got put together too. Like, it's a deck that is constantly doing what it is trying to do, which is great. And I've definitely made like tweaks and different changes and everything. Like, I've taken out Varel of the Hullclade because that's kind of just like a slower effect, and then just put in like an evolution stage, right? Just like put in proliferate, because turns out if you proliferate on Aragorn, double all the counters he has. Well, those are counters being placed. That's a whole nother suite of counters that I get to place on someone else. So like kind of going a bit more for like that, just like a more straightforward strategy like that. I've dabbled a bit more into like the fact that I have 2 commanders as a bonus. So I grab some of like the lieutenant cards. That will now trigger like twice because 2 commanders are out. I put in Gil Wayne, casting director, who just says like whenever a creature enters the battlefield, I can give them a roll counter. So I'll just give everyone the sorcerer roll, which means when they attack, I scry. So I'm just triggering Arwen every time a creature attacks.
Nice.
Like, yeah, and any other like scry mechanics I put in here, like Galadriel and some of like the other elf cards from Lord of the Rings. Like, I get to keep this deck very flavorful somehow, despite also putting in things that, you know, have nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. And it's just been really fun. It's just been extremely fun throughout the entire time I've played the deck. And people like seeing this. Like, they like seeing that this is getting there. Even, you know, whether or not it's like a threat to them, because I don't have a trample counter, so it's kind of fine, guys. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But just like having that, like, oh, this is something new. Like, this is a Kuro deck. And I might not see this again. And wow, it's like really going off. It's really doing the thing. Okay, ring tempt. Okay, counters. Oh my gosh, I don't even know what's going on over there, but Kuro has a giant board state. and that's like its own thing. And then also, I've managed to partner up with luxury counters, if anyone has heard of them. But they have these like ability counters that are, you know, they're like nice and gold and everything. And the packs that they come in are 2 packs. So it's just like on top of just having this very unique deck, I've also been able to like get unique tokens for them. So now it's just like, okay, Aragorn gets like a trample, a cool little like gold plated trample counter. Well, you know what, so will his lady wife Arwen, you know. And then they're just gonna swing on in there and just crush you in style. And that's just like, it just adds like an extra layer of just like, wow, this is like a personal deck, and I really really like it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it really comes through. All of those things are just kind of the things that you want to have in a deck when you're building it, when you're playing it, and you just know you'll have this deck forever.
Yeah. Oh, I have no reason to take this apart. It's a unique experience. Like with having 50 commander decks and counting, I always want to make sure that my play experience is different amongst them. Because I don't want to have like I don't want to have 2 Steal Your Girl decks. So then like when I had 2 decks that kind of overlapped that way, I made them different, right? I had them do different things. Yeah. This deck, I don't imagine I'll like a Bant and ability counter deck in the future as much as I like this one. Yeah. But like these cards are going to like uniquely stay here. The ring tempt cards are only going to be in this deck. All these scry cards are only going to be in this deck, and then all of them together it's just like such a unique thing. And yeah, I'll be able to play this forever, like forever ever.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I also enjoy when a deck has kind of like potential. I guess there's a balance here. I like it when a deck has potential for upgrades in future sets. Oh yeah. But maybe not too much, just because like I know they throw in ability counters here and there, so you always have some new stuff to look for and potentially try out in this deck. But I also like that the ring tempts you is something that, unless we get another Lord of the Rings set, which at least right now there's like no talks of it that I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know what cards they would I don't need. Listen, I love Aragorn. I don't need 4 more of them. Jesus
right.
Christ. Like
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, and I like how the ring tempsu cards here, they're kind of locked in, right? Like those are just going to be here, and yeah, and so I like that. There's like potential for changes in the future you can test out, but kind of like the core of the deck will remain how it is. And yeah, something about that I think adds to the longevity of how long you keep this deck around.
Oh, absolutely.
For when you're playing this deck, we talked about a little bit of some of the things this deck is weak to. Is there anything else that you kind of like have in your mind when you're playing it that, you know, like its weaknesses basically?
No, other than just like making sure, just trying to get the ring temp mechanic to like happen more often, and not like just in response to players. Because like I think there might literally just be like 7 to 8 times I can specifically do like ring tempt just by itself. So it's like, just finding that balance there, but still getting ability counters, still spreading them around. Really, it's just trample. Honestly, it's just trample and finding cards that will give trample that I want to put in here. Like plus and counters are all around this deck, and there are cards that say like, creatures with plus and counters get trample and everything, but some of them I already have in other decks, and they kind of just fit like a little bit more. Others don't fit like the necessarily the flavor I like. Like there's like a bug on a lamp that gives creatures a plus and counters trample. I just don't think that Aragorn and Arwen just ain't messing around with that. Like that's just they just ain't about it. So like that just doesn't strike me as like a card I want to add. So I don't. But I'll try to find some other way to get a trample counter. Now that's way more flavorful. Will uniquely be relevant to this deck. And it'll be that much more satisfying when I'm just like, okay, I've spread trample counters around and now I'm killing you, versus just like, creatures with plus and counters are unblockable and I'll swing, right? Like that is, this is a way more flavorful approach. And yeah, I'm just gonna keep on rocking that. So as more cards come out, we'll keep messing around.
I like that. Yeah, it's kind of like objectively less optimized, but much more rewarding. So it adds a lot to that when you're able to make it work.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like even just in green, there's probably 1,000 cards that give stuff trample, all of your stuff trample, but
right.
But yeah, but then if you fit in with the theme of counters and you just stick with trample counters, then you have all of these other cards that like work together with that. And yeah, it all kind of comes together. So
yeah, no, that's exactly what it is.
I love it. That makes sense. If you had to pick one card in this deck to call out as like the MVP or the most synergistic card that you just love to see when you play it, what card would you pick?
Frodo's really good. Frodo's just triggering the ring tempt every single like time. Like it's so like, and it's just so important. It's so very important that happens. I would say probably Orm is really good. Ring Goes South is really good. Like this deck is so fun. I want to play it right now.
Well, that's a good sign if if this question is something that, and for anyone out there like just thinking about their decks, if this question is something that's like you have multiple answers for, you're like any of these work really well and kind of make the deck function, that just goes to show that you have a lot of cross deck synergies. And I think that's really cool. And then if you get multiples of these cards out at the same time, it really starts working.
I think I would say it's honestly between Elrond, Lord of Rivendell, which of course I have like the Surge foil thing for.
Oh, beautiful.
It's either Elrond, Lord of Rivendell, Frodo Baggins, and then the Ozolith, but specifically, of course, the Lord of the Rings, Aganath, Pillar of the Kings version of it, which is honestly the only reason not the only reason I have it in here, because obviously it's a good card and it fits what this deck wants to do, but like especially because it has the Lord of the Rings art for it. Just allows me to stay like even more on flavor and on theme with it.
That's so good. Yeah, so good. I really like, Ozolith in this deck especially, but I just, I'm a fan of, there were some Lord of the Rings cards in like the holiday bundles that released later, and I just love the reskins of popular commander cards in Lord of the
Yes.
Rings flavor, like the Ozolith for that.
Yep. Galadriel. I got the Galadriel Light of Valinor from there. Because she puts her alliance ability gets me mana, puts +++ encounters on each creature, which will of course also mean one for Aragorn and then one for someone else, and then also scry 2 draw a card. So it's just like, okay.
Oh, perfect.
All right, Galadriel also officiates this wedding, apparently. Like, it's great. Everyone's coming out of the woodwork. Gandalf White Rider. It's like every time I cast a spell, a creature spell, I scry one. It's like, yeah. All right. Like, all of the Lord of the Rings wants these two together. Like, all of Middle Earth. And it's the fact that they just come together to do that is just so magical. It's just so magical. I love it.
It's really cool how all of this works together. Yeah, it's one of those things. That's why I love doing this so much. Is if I looked at this deck list online, I would be like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," and then that would probably be it. But getting into it and like you telling me about all of these cards and how they work all together is just it's so cool. It's so cool.
It's my favorite part about Commander. Like I feel like everyone one should have multiple decks. You know, I always stand by like most problems about Commander can be fixed by just having more Commander decks. I know it's not like easy for everyone, but I just mean like Commander in general. It's like having more options to like fit different play groups, fit different power levels, and to also just like just have a diverse sense of play. And this one deck specifically is going to have a very unique style of play all the time that I don't think I'll get in any other deck I build.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really good advice, because I think when people have less decks, maybe when they're starting out, or if they just have less decks, I think it's more tempting to like you want to put all of your strongest cards that you can find in those decks. But then so I tend to every year I kind of like take some decks apart if I haven't enjoyed them enough that year, and right now I have about 20-ish, which is like a lot compared to most of my local play group will have like less than 5. So I love that you have even more. You have twice as many as I do, and I really do think it's like you learn a lot about how to build decks like without like trying to make them unique from each other is something that is really cool to investigate. And then when I'm building a new deck, I'm not going to put all of the most like top tier Commander staples into it, because you
put it in a different deck, right? So you're like, okay, well I already have what's like a blue staple card,
like Rhystic Study.
Yeah, like Rhystic Study is not going to come anywhere near this deck. Okay, it's just like I scry a lot, so like whatever card is at the top is typically like among the best that I want to draw anyway. So like you get to explore that aspect there of just like, well, what if the top card is just always what you want because you scried it, right? And then just like other ways to draw more. Danny Pink is like a brand new card I've added that like specifically loves counters on creatures. Cool. Like then like that's a draw outlet. But like Rhystic Study, like it just doesn't fit enough of the themes of this deck, so I just won't put it in here. I just have other things that fit that role better.
Yeah, and I think like if I had a Rhystic Study and I only had one blue deck, then I would be it would be so hard for me to resist putting it in.
Exactly.
But if I have 12 blue decks, I'm not going to buy 11 more Rhystic Studies. Like I'm just,
and you don't want to switch it every single time. And eventually, eventually, right? Eventually, you'd go like, oh my god, sorry guys. I know this is like my 5-color deck, and blue is just like a small splash in it. And here's Rhystic Study. Like I know you're kind of tired of seeing this in every other deck, but like here's Rhystic Study. It's like explore what other options are out there. At least like that, and that's just my prescription. That's what I hold to in how I build my decks, and why I have 50, and why I take apart maybe only one a year. Like once a year, I'll go like, okay, this one just hasn't brought joy, and so I'll take it apart.
Yeah, we think very similarly in this way, and it's interesting. I think it does. For me, at least, it adds a lot to search out. Like I'm like, I need this a blue deck, for example. I need 4 more card draw effects, but I've played these other cards enough that I'm not interested in them anymore. So and you kind of discover new cards that might even have more things going on with your deck.
You'll find a blue card that draws a card and also gains you 2 life. And hey, turns out your commander says every time you gain a life, do X, Y, and Z. So it becomes like, you know what? Yeah, Ristic Study might be better in the long run because I'll have drawn like 5 cards off of it before it gets dealt with. But this one lets me say, hey, my commander's doing a very specific thing, and that's really cool. So I'm going to run that one instead.
Exactly. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. I think.
Yeah,
I think it adds a lot, but it's something you might not run into until you start building
more than one.
Perhaps too many decks, but
yes, definitely too many decks. Yeah,
I love it. Okay, so I'm curious. This question that I love to ask, but it might just be this entire deck. But I'd like to know if you have any pet cards in this deck that you just can't resist playing.
Yeah, you are right. It is literally this whole deck. I can't. It's like a pet card that doesn't necessarily like do the thing, but like you run it anyway. And I would say because this deck itself is just like basically 100% like made by me, trying to do everything I can to make these 2 very specific characters work together when they're like quote unquote not supposed to, because like they're not built with partner with. I would say it's literally every single card. This stupid boon of safety that says put a shield counter on target creature and then scry 1 on a white. It's just like shit, like that's awesome, right? It's like because I'll put a shield counter on Aragorn and also Arwen, so then I just like double survive a board wipe and I scry, so now they're stronger. It's like it's
so good.
It's a pet card because it's kind of like there's I should just run flawless maneuver instead. I should do that instead. And I have 2 commanders. I have like twice the chance of getting that out. I should run flawless maneuver. But I have other decks that flawless maneuver fits a bit more of the theme, and boon of safety makes me point at my commanders more and say, look at them kiss. They're so cute together. And you're gonna look at it, trigger, and that means more to me than the like my board being safe, like my whole board being safe.
Yeah.
With the flawless maneuver. So I would say literally every single card in here that ring temps and scries, and puts an ability counter on here is a pet card, because I could / would / should simply be playing, some other meta card that does a universally better ability, but doesn't make anyone remember that my commanders did something.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. If you cast something silly like now for Wrath, now for Ruin against me,
right.
I would remember that so much more than if you played any other white like finisher.
Chroma's Will.
Oh,
like
right.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. How did that game with Kuro end? I know he was using some cool deck. Oh, it was just like a Chroma's Will. Oh,
right. That
cool. All right,
that's happened to me 100 times.
Right. It's just like, no, they played like Now for Wrath and Ruin, counter and everything, got 2+1/+1 counters, got like extra ability triggers, and then swung at me. And Arwen just happened to be like a 21/21 with like flying hexproof trample haste. And it's just like, I don't even know how you did that in Bant, but that's what happened, and it was sweet.
I would not forget that. That would be a game story memory for me forever.
Right. And, or at least it's far more readily available to be a memorable story versus just an Akroma's Will won the game.
Akroma's Will is cool, and I like the first couple times it killed me or I won with it, I was like, this card is cool. But then after that, it's just it's fun to find spicier, more flavorful versions of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so what is like a favorite in-game moment that you've had, speaking of memories while playing Commander, that you've had just while playing this deck?
I mean, it's every single time any player is just like, okay, wait, so how many counters does Arwen have? Every single time. Okay, now what abilities does she have? Okay, well, that has to be dealt with. Like, my little 2-mana commander over here that just says, whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on something, has to be taken out because... she has to be, because I made her that big of a threat, and also she has the ring on her, so it's just like cool. Yeah. You know. But honestly, it's just every single time I'm seeing a different aspect of the deck. Like, I have reason to believe in here, just like this really kind of shitty aftermath card, like our devastation card with aftermath. It's just like blue side, scry 3, and then I can pay 5, look at the top card of my deck if it's a creature put into the battlefield. And it's just like, you know what? I put in some, like, cards that are worth more than 5 mana into play because, like, I just did all this scry stuff and gained a bunch of counters, and then boom, now I just have, like, this out all of a sudden. And that's just, like, that's just a memorable moment. Being able to, like, sacrifice Boromir to protect my board, and then also ring tempt, and then swing back even harder. It's just like, you know what? That's pretty freaking sick. I love that. Putting a bunch of counters on my mana dorks so that they tap for a crap ton of mana is super cool. Swinging with, like, Parry the Pulverizer, Skyboon Evangelist, I think, is the last kind of, like, super neat thing I did. It's a card that has support. So, like, 5 mana, 3/3 flying. When it enters the battlefield, support 6. So I can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 6 target creatures. And whenever a creature with a counter on it attacks one of my opponents, that creature gains flying until end of turn. So all of a sudden, it's just like, I can give counters to my own board, or I can just put them on other people's creatures, and they'll have flying when they attack my opponents, and my cards, which already have counters on them anyway, by virtue of my deck, will also swing for flying.
So cool.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. Cool. I love it so much. Yeah.
Nice. It's one of those things where I just wouldn't know how cool this is until we really get into it. And then now I'm a little bit obsessed, I'll be honest.
Yes.
It's so good.
Yes.
So we've already come to my final question for you, which is, if you've piqued anybody's interest out there, perhaps like mine, what advice would you give to players looking to build a deck, either like same commanders as you have, or just kind of a similar kind of idea as what you've done with this deck? What advice would you give to them?
My advice, I mean, my first advice is always just like, be ready to build more commander decks so that you can have more experiences throughout Magic and all of its different avenues and flavors. There's not just one way to play any sort of strategy or deck or commander. There's always multiple. And even if you say, like, you only have one specific way you want to build something, there's other commanders that will let you focus in on a different aspect, right? So, like, if it's a green deck, like, you know, you think it's just green stompies, there are other types of green decks to play. Maybe it's big mana, maybe it's just like go wide, maybe it's tokens. There's a lot of different commanders that have different themes that will help you kind of like achieve that goal. The goal isn't always necessarily to win, but to just like have a commander deck that did the thing that it was trying to do in a unique and fun and annoyingly repeatable way. And that's largely how I go about it. I'm trying to have many, many unique experiences with my decks. And that's why I try to make sure that they run on like as many cards as possible, fire on all cylinders, doing what the commander is trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And we hadn't really gotten into this too much, but you could take Arwen and Aragorn like this and build the deck like totally differently from how you built it, but still kind of keep them as at the center of it.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool. Yeah, because, you know, at its core, it's like a counters deck that also does the scry stuff. And that's like a very flexible kind of idea. Right. You know, like the way you built it isn't the only way to build it. It's,
absolutely.
It's really cool.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. I love I love this deck. It's so fun.
Me too. as we kind of wrap things up, is there anything else that you want to say about this deck, or just a shout out kind of in general?
I've very much made the Aragorn my personality. This was certainly I mean, all of my Aragorn decks have been like a unique experience. And yeah, I mean, like, give them a look. See just like if you can, I can talk about any of my decks just as like this. Like I love and care for each and every one of my decks except for one very specific one, because I fucking hate Furcrag. Ugh. But every deck I own but my Furcrag deck, I can talk and gush about just like this one. Even if I haven't played it, like, you know, even if it's like the deck I've played like the least in the past like year or something, I can always go back to it and go like, oh, I know why I added this card, because it does this, and it's been so freaking fun. And I hope that everyone is able to do that or have that level of connection with their decks, because I know that gives me joy. And you know, everyone builds their decks for their own reasons, and you know, there's definitely no right or wrong. But I can definitely say the reason I am able to stick with 50 over I've been playing Magic since 2011, got into Commander in like 2013 maybe. I've been able to just keep on having my first 5 Commander decks I've ever built still to this day, just upgraded over time, because they are doing a very specific thing that gave me joy all the way back in the beginning, as they do now, you know, even if I've changed around what their decks do. So yeah, go check out my Twitch channel, because that's where I'll be playing these decks and just going like, oh my god, Aragorn did the thing. Where it's also where I will hype up everyone else and go, oh my god, your deck is doing the thing, that's so freaking cool, I love it. And also, hey, like, check out my Maxfield, where you can look at my other decks and just go like, oh, Kuro's cooking, I love it. Especially with the Aragorns.
Yes, yeah, and I'll have links to all of those things in the episode description. So definitely, if you don't follow Kuro on Twitch, at the very least, definitely go do that right now. Thank you so much for coming on and letting me ask you a whole bunch of questions about one of your decks. Yeah, I had a great time, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for letting me gush about this deck, because now I looked at it, I'm like, ooh, okay, I gotta make sure this Maxfield is updated, and 2, I gotta find a game to play.
That always happens to me. I'm like, when I talk to somebody about one of their decks, I'm like, okay, now I need to build it, and I need to go play some Commander immediately.
Yes,
in the mood.
That.
Awesome. Okay, well, yeah, everyone go follow Kuro, and thank you everybody for listening to this. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Oh, one last shout out for all of my patrons at the All That Glitters level, which is just one. Jeff, thank you so much for being a patron. I really appreciate it. We'll catch you all on the next one.
Bye, everyone.